Hey everybody, welcome back to Channel Talks and our first one for 2026. And of course, we start the year as usual with our friend Jay McBain, who's the chief analyst in for channels and partnerships and also ecosystems at Canalys. And congratulations are in order, my friend, on being recognized as the channel influence of the year. And of course, we have Scott Frew, the founder and CEO of iasset.com, who's investing heavily in Agentic AI and supporting the already what is the market-leading platform out there. So the topic today, Agentic AI and how the new era is going to affect the channel. Surprise, surprise. Gentlemen, welcome back to Channel Talks. This is going to be fun and informative. The Channel Talks community have asked me if we could actually get into a little bit of detail on the technical side of AI this time. So let's see how we go. You are both technical, I'm not. So you'll probably do a lot more talking than me. I always say that, but that never happens. But welcome back. This is going to be fun and informative, but the community has spoken and will listen. And the way I want to frame this is how we move from order take, which is transactional, to order make, which is customer value driven over lifetime value of an asset that any end customer is invested in with IT. But Scott and Jay, I've heard you both say in various formats that AI could move the industry from a reactive manual revenue motion, if I can call it that way, to a fully automated growth engine. And I've summarized a lot of what you guys have talked about, which says to me where sales teams can focus on landing the deal, and then AI takes over the rest, which is a huge statement. And that's what I want to look into. And take over the rest, meaning identifying expansion opportunities, increased wallet share, triggering renewals, of course, which is table stakes. But in particular, automating and orchestrating cross-sell and upsell motions with human intervention, given that we're seeing hyperscale, but we're also seeing marketplaces all over the place. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys to explain that. And let's just start with a question. Can AI finally make expansion revenue predictable, scalable? Can it be a scalable cadence? And is that available for every IT business? Jay, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, and I think that's the journey we're on. I don't think anyone's expecting 2026 to be a magic year that we check the box and the world becomes fully automated and humans start to get replaced by machines, and this starts a different era in our industry. What I do think is the tools that has mostly for 3 years now been a consumer play, with NVIDIA becoming the most valuable company, with Elon Musk becoming the richest person, with OpenAI becoming the fastest growing product in history. But the recent kind of 95% failure rate from MIT, and then Accenture kind of said that their failure rate's closer to 90%. We're watching a tale of two cities.
What do you mean by failure rate?
Well, the failure rate of taking an AI related project or proof of concept pilot into production.
Right. Is that because they can't yet identify real proof of value, or we're just so early in a process?
It's mostly on return on investment or predicted return on investment.
Okay.
The proof points maybe were a little bit hyped, or a little bit overestimated.
Undersold.
Undersold, oversold. So I go back to Bill Gates in 1996. We tend to overestimate the first 2 years of a new technology era and then underestimate the first 10.
Yep.
So I think what we're talking about right now, the answer to your question, we're in that magical 8-year kind of journey. I won't call it an evolution because it's happening very quickly, but where humans become superhuman and AI starts to play much more of a role at making these things work much better. And obviously technology playing a bigger role than it ever has, and the people, the processes, the programs, the underlying technology that kind of runs our industry. But anybody looking for a magical date in June or in September that will have reached some sort of AGI in different payments or renewals or in how money changes hands. No, we're just going to get steadily better. And I think we're going to, grow by 50% a year in terms of how well we perform. And there's going to be a point in time where there's no looking back.
Okay, so Scott, that's interesting because you're pouring a lot of money into an already exciting platform. It's well ahead of anything that's out there because it focuses on data rather than on just process and uses data to inform the process rather than the other way around. Why are you in such a rush?
So to give you a bit of background, I see it as there's three parts of this puzzle. The data is, of course, critical, and if you don't have accurate data, AI is going to hallucinate all over the place. So foundations are number one, and that's always what we've led with. I think in terms of standard processes like renewals process, even expand, end of life, all of those RevOps processes can actually be handled by machine learning. They don't need AI. We can run those today because they're rules-based. They're part of a programmatics. They're part of a delivery of, if this equals that, and standard machine learning code, obviously, because that's what we've been doing for the last 17 years, can handle all that. The piece that where we see AI is sitting on top of the platform, rather than letting it loose in the data set to do whatever it wants to do, we put it over top of the platform. So the platform is the guardrail. It understands the process, the data controls, what it won't let out, what it will let out. And then you can use the AI for its more creative intelligence function. So with the heavy testing we're going through at the moment, and the reason we're probably a bit slower than most is because we regard ourselves as a financial system, because we are effectively pushing out quotes and they have to be accurate to the cent. So we cannot afford AI at any of our customers to go out and say, it's $10,000 when it's $5,000 or whatever. So that, as part of that extensive testing, we're running it over the guardrails, but we're saying to it, you know what? We don't want to report, because most people I've seen are using AI just effectively to generate a different kind of report. We're looking for intelligence that you would not normally pick up. And there's a post going out, if I get around to it today, about 5 of the pieces of the puzzle that come together that you wouldn't normally get out of a reporting function, where the intelligence has looked at the data set and said, well, here's 5 threats or 5 opportunities or whatever, which I think is a better use of AI. Plus, as most of you know, I'm big on the environment and I'm living here on a regenerative farm, but we don't want to burn the house down with energy and data centers asking silly questions or things that can be done with standard compute power.
Now, okay, so what comes to mind when I listen to you both is it can only be as good as the data. Because AI has to have data. All right, that's not profound. What is profound to me is the data is there, even in a manual process or in an automated process, like what the iasset platform does. We see most of our customers still focused on renewals and automating that, as opposed to focused on expand opportunities and lifetime value of the asset, which is what the customer wants, and not being delivered yet. What's the bottleneck when the data is already there? Or is it just because most tools out there don't play with the data, they just play with the process? Jay, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I don't agree that data is there. In the industry-wide metric, 99% of business data at this point has not been trained or tuned into any model.
Yeah.
There's amount of laggards based on compliance and governance and regulatory. There's all kinds of things. Then when you overlay financial data on top of that, it's the least likely to get quickly trained into models that have a very thin line between consumer and corporate use cases. And I don't think there's trust built yet that dumping your ERP system into ChatGPT will stop your competitors from seeing your P&L. That's kind of a loose example, but 83% of that data that I mentioned, 99% not trained, 83% of it sits in cold storage. It's actually not accessible, even if you did want to build an agentic model. to go knock on the door and get it. No, it's sitting in old school. It has not been cleansed. It has not been prepped. It's not ready to be used. So it hasn't been modernized to the point where it could get access to systems. That's why I'm talking about an 8-year journey here, because these are pretty major projects and they start on the financial side, and it's modernizing, systems that are pretty much at the core of every company. And, the closer you get to the core, the danger or the risk factors, for people trying to remain employed, go up pretty quickly. When you get out to the outside, marketing data, easy. Sales data, a little bit more protected, but, how do I, as Scott mentioned, think through a better chatbot? How do I think through a better marketing campaign? How do I think through my programmatic elements when it comes to the channel, the everyday engagement, the everyday, kind of enablement and training, and all those things, education can be thought through with generative AI, and then more so with agentic models. But the closer you get to the core, the longer term, vision you have to have in terms of how we do this. The wins have to be a crawl, walk, run. There has to be very specific, returns on investment. There has to be very specific area, very small, scopable areas that we can go and solve for. And no one's ready to, walk into a major digital transformation.
Well, that's really interesting, Scott, because I want to pick up on that with you, because we have to agree with what Jay's saying because we see it, but yet we can grab stored data, let's call it, moving it into a small language model rather than a large language model. It is your data, it's ERP data, it's because you sold something. Then you can do something with that. So is it more a lack of vision around, I have collected data, but for a different purpose. I collected that data and I've purposed that data so I could account for what I've sold, as opposed to repurpose that same data so I can sell more from it. And can AI agents accelerate that process more than what the automation that already exists, say for example in iasset platform, make that vision come to reality faster? Because it seems to be a bottleneck.
Yes and no. If you assume for the moment that an agent's effectively just like a human but faster and has access to more information, the AI agent can't create data out of nothing. So how beneficial that is, I don't know. What I think everyone misses is synchronicity. So when I say synchronicity, there's two pieces to that puzzle. There's internal synchronicity, like ERP, ITSM, CRM, license management, the whole lot that you've got sitting in silos there and connecting those together. That's where we started 17 years ago, was connecting all those silos together so you end up with clean data at all times, because if one system changed, it updated everything else. Now we're talking about channel synchronicity. Right now, we've got one client, a global client, that's platforms currently cleansing its data against one of the vendors' data. It's going to take 6 or 7 days, and it's literally churning through every contract, renewal, serial number, everything. And at the end of this process, which we've done with other countries already, at the end of this process, they will be completely in sync with their vendor. So they're synchronized internally with ERP and their CRM, and now they're synced up to this particular vendor. And we have resellers, we haven't opened up yet for the resellers, but resellers that use that company, that distributor, will then synchronize into them. So you will have the entire channel working lockstep for the end user's benefit without any wiggle room on data ever again. So synchronicity is the bigger issue with data sets than it is about the data itself.
So Jay, synchronicity is a really interesting way of looking at it. You talk about 15 moments, 24 moments, depending on when I'm listening to you, because you tailor it. You tailor it for a particular kind of a transaction mechanism. Are these moments being synchronized?
They're not. So it's 28 moments on average, and that's a considered purchase. So that's whether you're buying $1 million worth of software or if you're going to buy a car. It's a human psychology behavioral analysis. And There's some people that drive to the dealership and do what they've done for 50 years and just get a new car from Larry, the salesperson. But then there's people like me that spend 55 moments on YouTube watching every last video on that car, and it averages out at 28. And the same thing for in the technology industry. So in those moments, there's not a lot of synchronization between the owners of the 28 moments and the orchestrators who can push it through. We think that this is a massive opportunity for distribution, working with iasset, for example, and bringing these moments together. If there's going to be 7 partners on average in a deal, one of those maybe being a reseller. If there's going to be 7 layers to the average solution, and that's in cloud infrastructure, that's in SaaS, that's in cyber, that's in distribution now. The average deal has 7 layers. So now you're 7 plus 7, and the average buying committee at the customer is 13 people. 13 plus 7 plus 7. There's a lot to orchestrate across these 28 moments.
How many of those 28 moments would you consider to be transactional? Because transactional can be synchronized through technology.
Yeah. The transaction is the 29th moment.
Yeah. Okay.
When money changes hands, and in buying a car, you pretty much are forced to buy through a dealer. It's it's a regulatory thing. But in technology, if you're buying through a marketplace like an AWS, if you're buying through a distributor like a TD Synnex or Ingram or Dicker or anyone else, through a reseller, if you're buying through a direct reseller, there's all different kinds of ways money can change hands. But that's when the 28 moments on average have been completed. And the work we now know, and Canalys was acquired into Omdia, which is part of Informatech Target, which is a public company in the US, but it's majorly owned by Informa in the UK. It's a lot of steps.
Yeah.
But I work for a buyer intent company. And the reason we run hundreds of the biggest events in the world, the reason we run hundreds of the biggest magazines in the world is to fill in the 28 moments. As customers are getting smart, they're listening to podcasts like this, they're reading ebooks, they're going to events, they're bringing in 7 partners. The thing that this industry's never had, and what we're trying to bring to this industry, is the moments mid-journey, like at about moment 12, where the advisory, the consulting, the design, the architecture work happens. And we're starting to visualize these $1 million deals now in where they're actually closed. The transaction happens at moment 29, but the deal is done by moment 16.
Right.
And so as we're going through this, if a customer's spending millions of dollars on something, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to the smartest people around them to make sure that they're building the best of breed, best 7-layer stack, for their particular solution. And the better we get to synchronize who's in those moments, what those moments actually are, and the fact that everyone around this, orchestrated moments, all boats rise when we get visibility to it. We're not even at the transaction yet, but there's no synchronization, and the people that ought to be orchestrating are far behind on injecting AI and other technologies to be able to do that.
So the interesting thing, Jay, is that you've got the 28 leading to the 29th, which is the transaction. One of our vendors ran an analysis, and their product lifetime value is 22 times the initial purchase. So you've got 28 coming into 29, and then you've got 22 trailing behind it.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, our industry is, and we've talked about this in the past, 2/3 of our now $6.07 trillion industry in 2026, by the way, growing at 10.2%, double-digit growth when every other industry is growing about 2.7. But when you look at the way our industry works, 2/3 of it's now subscription consumption.
Yeah.
So it's not an asset. It's not a physical asset you're buying and then disposing and replacing. It is something that you're signing on for, which is some sort of renewal expectation or some sort of consumption model. And now with AI, micro consumption model that you pay long term. So some things that have happened since the last time we talked. In October, for example, Microsoft shut down 2/3 of the world's distributors.
Yes.
You'd wonder, a company with that type of channel history over 40 years, 50 years, they just celebrated their 50th anniversary. Why would you cut 2/3 of your world's distributors?
Yeah.
Then second, they took their $300,000 partner floor and they moved it to $1 million. So they just moved a lot of really large partners between 300K and $1 million to distribution.
Mhm.
And then
But
third, they cut off everybody below $1,000. So there's no free Microsoft Office for, single people who, say that they're partners. But in doing all that,
is it fewer distributors doing more and have
they
to
are.
actually and show value
the
why they
fewer
can do more?
distributors, in our research, I mean, we're right now working on last year we did the Omdia top 1,000 partners. That came out in October as well. The top 1,000 partners deliver 2/3 of all the tech services in the world. 30 of them deliver more than the next 970 combined. The 970 combined deliver more than the next million. So how top end, now we're doing it for distribution, and we were going to do the distribution 500, but 500 distributors no longer exist. So we've had to lower it to the distributor 250. And in the 250, we have the top 20 distributors doing, pretty close to 2/3 of the entire industry.
Yeah.
These distributors who are getting larger because the smaller, less than $30 million Microsoft distributors, for example, in country are being shut off. That money moves into the larger. All of the $300,000 direct partners to $1 million now move over, so it makes these ones even larger. So you have distributors growing at double digits where every one of their product categories isn't.
Yeah.
Just because of shifting in terms of, and now in 5 days, you have Cisco moving into a point system, moving into these new economics. There's over 400 companies now that have followed Microsoft into this new economics of how they do things. So we're in a really interesting channel world, but the platform economy, which Microsoft is part of, the top 3 hyperscalers, they play a role in SaaS with Salesforce and ServiceNow and other major platforms.
Yep.
They play a role in security with Palo Alto and Fortinet and CrowdStrike and other platforms. This platform economy is what is going to drive us for the next 20 years, where bigger companies benefit.
Okay, that's really interesting, Scott. I'm going to throw this back to you because apparently you know a little bit about distribution, so I'm told. It's always been the case that vendors, particularly the ones of the likes that Jay just mentioned, and it goes on and on, they're not looking for transactional value as much. Anyone can do that, really. They're looking for other kinds of value. The conversations you're having with vendors about how to automate opportunities, right? Forget about the order take. That's what frustrates a vendor the most. You're just focused on order take, and they're what I used to call the box movers. And now what they're looking for is value. In other words, our people sold the stuff. Now you guys have got to keep this thing selling. All right. What are they investing in to do that? Because without that, they're not going to make that list that Jay's talking about.
So largely, I would say they're not, as a general rule, and you can systemically in some of the biggest distributors. The ones that have taken a step forward, there's some excellent examples that have taken over entire exclusive contracts and are running it effectively as the transactional arm of the vendor and managing the entire reseller base. And because they have an exclusive arrangement, they don't have to worry about competition, but they do have to worry about expansion, and there's probably a little bit more pressure on margin because they don't have to compete per se. There's a lot of services, and lifecycle services is a critical component because the vendor's now relying on them totally to make sure that the whole LIPS, land, invest, protect, surrender process works. If you talk about some of the other value around pre-sales and post-sales, I still think you have this dichotomy or this separation between the big boys who don't normally provide that sort of service, especially in North America, versus the pure VADs that are adding a lot of value as the front end. And you always have, to Jay's point, if you assume for the moment, I'm not suggesting Microsoft's old technology, but it's understood all the way down to the consumer pretty much on how to use Word. So those sort of distributors will continue to thrive based on the transactional part. but there's still newer tech like Agentic AI or cyber, or any cyber service. You need some level of skill to be able to deploy and maintain. Those value components still exist in the channel. So you'll see, I think, this split between the gorillas, to Jay's point about the 250. You'll have the gorillas at the top, and they'll be doing all that transactional piece, and then the specialist VADs at the size they are, doing the market creation, especially for new vendors that are coming out, because the big distributors won't touch them, because if you're not, let's say, a couple of $100 million in revenue, it's not worth them picking up and setting it up in their systems. You still need that underlying second tier.
So how does Agentic AI, let's just give it its most popular name, that has to change channel roles. It has to change the way that distributors work, has to change the way that partners work, just has to. How?
I don't think it does, Nick. I think it just adds an efficiency and a creativity layer that will support them. Yes, it might replace some functions that are not particularly intelligent functions, but it gives the humans the ability to be more creative and get on with things that are more accretive and value, rather than being down in the drudgery of trying to work out what goes with what, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the vendors are getting more aggressive, and they're actually making changes ahead of AI.
Yeah.
So there's this expectation that, and which is right or wrong, they're thinking they're making program changes with the assumption that AI at some point is going to pick up, some of the slack. And a good example is when I talked about point systems, because this has the biggest economic impact on partners by orders of magnitude and distribution.
Right.
And all a point system is, by the way, because 44 years we've really paid out at the point of sale, the whatever margin, 40% in the 80s, 30% in the 90s. Today, the cost of moving money declared by the marketplaces, Microsoft first, then Google followed, then AWS followed, is 3%. The cost of moving money is identical to what Visa and MasterCard charge when you swipe at a restaurant. So with that being said, one of the things we were watching over the last couple of years since they made that move, is this an opportunity for vendors to be more profitable? Go back to Wall Street and say, hey, look, increase my profit by 10%, and they didn't. They realized that the other 17%, in that 20% margin that you would have been paying on the front and back end,
right,
had a lot of assumptions built into it. You were assuming that the partner was there during those critical consulting, advisory, design, architecture moments. And then you were making a secondary, and then they collect the money. And then you're making a secondary set of assumptions that they're going to stay with that customer every 30 days forever. And they're going to work on that renewal. They're going to work on that replace. They're going to work to make sure that not only do you get the next deal, but you enrich it. You're going to get the deal at 108% of what the original one was. And that's how 2/3 of our industry is measured. Customer for life, and the ability to enrich your current customers is the core measurement. That's how companies are valued. Now, when you make these assumptions, we know what assumption stands for. And when you start making assumptions on top of assumptions, that's where companies are changing their programs. The point system, very simply, is to take 20% margin down to 3 and then start paying back to 20 again.
Yeah.
And that has an assumption that you can measure each one of these 28 moments. I can start to measure every day, every 30 days after, and I can expand the customer journey, which now never ends, and have enough money to pay a partner, not as a cash register, doing a transaction, but if they're truly doing all these wonderful things before, during, and after, they're going to make more than 20%.
Yeah.
That's how critical they are inside that particular customer. But how do I measure that? How do I get and orchestrate that? Because that data sits in 1,000 different places.
Correct.
And the motivation to share it and the motivation to orchestrate that among other partners, other vendors, the 13 members of the buying committee. I mean, there's a lot to do here. And this bigger thing that someday I'm going to have these agentic models, which is side door or backdoor access. And I don't have to wait for somebody to do a deal registration. I don't have to wait for a human to call another human sitting in a cubicle. It's happening. Our systems.
Yeah. So are you saying, because I wanted to ask you, but you just jumped in and answered it before I asked. So it must have been a good question. But are we talking about visibility now? Because in order to be able to measure all that, You need visibility of the entire transaction from the day it leaves the factory to the day it gets deployed into a data center or a workflow or whatever. Can agents provide that visibility?
Well, that's the data challenge that, when you asked originally, we just need the data and we can do it. What I'm saying is when you just included supply chain, now you're talking about factory and shipments and containers and connecting that to a product SKU, to a serial number, then to the, as complex it is. And I've spoken at several supply chain conferences.
Yep.
And they'll talk about the 900 raw materials and components that China kind of owns the majority of now, that go into everything in technology. And then it comes down into the ERP system. Supply chain turns into go to market, but then there's about 900 elements of complexity to getting the product to market and managing it. So how these systems end up as a bow tie, coming into the ERP system. This is why what iasset and others, play a critical role in. But remember, this data sits in a lot of different places, including at my company.
Yep.
The moments sit everywhere. And again, no company's going to be perfect. You're not ever going to see 7 partners in a deal. You're never going to see 28 moments, but you've got to be 10 to 20% better than your competitors. Now, if we move post-sale, you're never going to see, everything. You can't see every moment. You can't see every phone call. You can't see every customer meeting. There's no way to see all the implementations, the integrations, the managed service, like all the things, all the activities that go on. But if you can do it 10 to 20% better than your competitors, you grow faster, you remain employed, and that's the goal of everyone. So before we check the box and get to some holy grail here that we're never going to reach, all we're focused on is who we're competing with and just staying, a few steps ahead.
And AI agents can automate that, Scott, right? Agents could automate that. But
don't get confused with agentic AI and process. So this is why I'm trying to break the machine learning over.
Right.
In Jay's case, where all of these different things are happening, but no one can see it.
Right. I
contend that we've taken some major footsteps with the quote reference technology and things like that to be able to see through the channel. If you can connect the silos together, we can actually provide that level of service where you can see total visibility. Okay, down at the ITSM level of ServiceNow, things like that, we may not carry, they've been deployed, but that's just a data field, right? We're very focused on the RevOps, but making sure the vendors can see all the way through the channel to see where their quotes have landed, especially on higher tech things, not laptops and bits and pieces, but it is possible. It's just connecting the dots, which is exactly why we're here.
Yeah, Jay, you mentioned distribution before, which is obviously one of my favorite topics, given my background. What in particular, the last 6 months, the conversation that I'm having with vendors is, well, who are the distributors that use your platform? And does that imply because we can't do it or we don't want to do it? I think that's what it implies, but I wanted to ask you guys, can the vendor ever do it?
Yeah, I want to invest in platform level distributors. And the way to think about it is those distributors that have invested or could invest $1 billion in the platform. And that takes 250 distributors down to about 5. Once you're past 5, by the way, you're either a niche federal government, you're a niche SMB regional, and you're using another platform from another theater. I mean, it gets pretty small after that. Or you're a niche cyber. So now, if I'm invested in a platform, remember the only thing, this orchestration and this collection of what Scott said, connecting the dots, we're connecting almost an infinite number of dots here. This isn't just going to integrate with 6 companies and we're going to pull this thing together. We're connecting with trillions of potential data sources of who owns 28 moments at a particular departmental customer journey of 13 people.
Spot on.
Now, again, we're never going to get all the moments, but if we get more than our competitors, we see the deals before they do,
Yep.
We win more than our fair share, and we obviously retain them. Now, in this, marketplaces are the most or highest potential, highest propensity to win this orchestration. Why? Because let me flip over to just the hyperscaler marketplaces, AWS. AWS right now is obviously focused on transactional. They've had 12 new companies join the $1 billion club last year. You know, they're growing at 82% compounded. I mean, it's becoming material. Now, one thing that we're watching specifically inside these big numbers is how much partner funding is in each deal. And AWS would have just told us that, you know, they reached the 50%. We predicted 50% was going to hit maybe next year. But half of all deals growing at this level have private offers, multi-partner offers, distributor sellers of record. We have that going to 59% in the next couple of years. What's really interesting about this is now the customer pays for the products. They also pay for the services, and they pay for everything. Now the marketplace becomes the place where partners themselves earn their services dollars and get their managed services renewals or get their projects paid for out of the marketplace, funded by credits that already $600 billion sitting there. So marketplaces have this propensity now serving a millennial buyer, majority millennial buyer that flipped over last year in our industry, who wants to be digital, to collect these moments not only before the 28 of them. There's going to be a motivation at some point, maybe for us, to upload the attendees of Black Hat, the people who read Information Week last week. I mean, there's going to be a motivation for most companies, kind of call it the Amazon effect, where to enter this gravity or to get to these economics. Because we might be paid for that MQL out of Amazon dollars, these private offers. You know, whatever nickel or dime we could make in that realm. But plugging into this economy is more so post-purchase. Why? Because 2/3 is subscription consumption. Everything is about enrichment. And as we move into micro consumption, there's going to be a metered system of utility system that owns it. But the economics through that metering is going to handle through a marketplace. And so this is where everything kind of goes, I believe, in the future. Distribution plays a huge role because 70% of our industry was sold indirectly last year.
Yeah.
And moving, you know, lots of hardware along with lots of software and integrating with these services and telco, you know, it is the infrastructure that builds out the next 20 years to the AI era, about $7 trillion of investment that's going to be made. So all of this, I think, starts to play there. And that's where vendors...
Do the hyperscaler marketplaces replace distribution, or do they fulfill them?
Well, they're not. In some cases, you know, by the way, TD SYNNEX or Ingram would tell you that they're doing more business now working with the hyperscalers. And part of the reason they're growing by double digits isn't just program changes by vendors. It's, you know, the fact that they're getting more involved in a market that's growing at 30% compounded. Getting more involved with SaaS, which a lot of agentic AI sits inside of SaaS almost in every segment of the market, which is growing north of 20%. They're hitching their engines, but they understand that they may lose the transaction. They've lost 3% opportunity. And by the way, they have to split that with the partner. It's not very rich. We're talking basis points here. But the big distributors have always lived on basis points. Whether they win or lose the transaction isn't game over for distribution. There's still 17% of the deal that is going to play out before, during, and after the transaction. The value-added distributors that Scott talked about and has a long, long history building are actually built to compete for those dollars in every stage by helping the partner. And the partner, and I think distribution is going to, you know, be successful when they come out of hiding and earn one of those 7, or now it's 8 seats around the table.
Okay.
And everybody's going to be happy that a distributor is there because all boats rise when they're there.
If the value is there.
Well, if they built it.
As long as they don't sell direct.
Well, but I also agree with you. I've always enjoyed competing against the distributors who think in terms of basis points, because as far as I'm concerned, basis points is an outcome. It's already happened. If you haven't worked on what you need to do, to get that profit. I mean, you're just counting stuff that would have happened anyway. The value inside distribution, I agree with you 100%. This platform, I was actually going to ask you, can you define platform? But you eloquently did. You're way ahead of me today. But the idea of a platform is not necessarily owning the platform. It's having one so that you can actually add competitive advantage with what you do. To build your own platform is suicide. It's like to build your own ERP. That's crazy. But to build your own marketplace is smart. All right. To build a transaction platform that's going to allow for the land, the expand, the invest, the end of life and things like that, which is massive value for a distributor. But if they're working with hyperscalers, all right, those transactions should just 10x or 15 or 20x could be, especially if I believe your research, and I do, it could get to that. That has to happen, but it hasn't even been automated yet. So how far behind are we in getting to that point of automation, let alone getting to that point of using, agents, AI agents to accelerate that? I want you both to answer that question because I think you might have some different views. So go, Scott.
Okay. Well, you can't accelerate an AI agent if you don't have your foundation set. And and I might be in trouble for this. Other than our customers, I don't see any of the distributors at the point where they've got that data in a format that the agents can do what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, there's some very big distributors throwing some very big AI statements around, but when you talk to the resellers, they're still struggling to get the right data set. So it doesn't matter how smart the agent is, you've got to get foundation. I know it's boring and it's just something you've got to deal with. And the IT industry's had problems with trying to keep clean data for years, but it's connecting everything together is the only way at a hyper speed, because this is not a human involved process. This has to be done with machinery and not necessarily agents, but machine learning to clean the data out as it's flowing. And then your agents can go to town. But until that happens, it doesn't matter how much of a platform company you are. If you don't have the underlying data, it's just going to send out bad quotes.
Yeah. Jay, is that because the people who need to see that don't see it? And the analogy that I bring to mind is you can't build a house without a slab, but no one sees the slab. But it doesn't exist without it. So it's not sexy.
Talk about a category, up on my channel tech stack that I've been watching for decades, and it really never grew. And companies like Model N, companies like Zyme and Entomo back in the day. Both Zyme and Entomo got acquired by E2Open, but that E2Open is a good example of a supply chain bow tie company owning the supply chain and owning the complexity, but they never really did anything with it. And the fact is the sales pitch that we're going to come in and clean your data, we're going to come in and make it usable, fell on deaf ears. There was literally zero budget for that. The only way those platforms won is convincing CFOs that they were overpaying incentives by the billions of dollars by 10% because of clumsy data. 1 comma in a name, double paid a partner, triple paid a partner, and none of those partners complained. They only complained if they didn't get the payment.
Right.
So just the cleansing of data as an industry, kind of fell flat unless you could link it to either overpayments, which is, there's a direct ROI of cleansing data, and there's a certain percentage point, it was 89 or 91% that was the, perfect threshold before AI of having clean data of where the point of diminishing returns. The other part of it was fraud. Outright, causing my name to have commas in different spots and submitting the same claim 10 different times with 10 different commas. That was outright fraud. And now in that case, it wasn't just the overpayment. It was the, I don't want to deal with, criminal or people that are stealing from me. So that was kind of the industry. And unless they pegged it to something financial, the channel chief didn't want to buy it, didn't need it. Ops folks really didn't need it because they weren't doing anything with their sales, marketing, other data, to make it useful. And then now you just have the CFO that said, hey, this is a quick win for me. If I can save my company $1 billion by, spending, $10 million on this, it's a quick win. But that's it. And that's been the history of, what we'll call cleansing data in our industry. And there's no other motivation unless it becomes truly financial. But guess what? We're right at the precipice here. When you're talking enrichment, shareholder value, and being able to connect these dots.
Yep.
Now you're back to the CFO again, not just on job preservation, but you're talking about changing the game.
Ultimately, the reason I didn't see Zyme and those going that well is because and I am a distributor guy, I always have been. The data, if your POS data is coming in dirty, you've got a problem at the POS collection point, not something you need to clean up later on somewhere else in a back room full of people.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Jay, because we've been telling vendors for 10 years, start now. If they started 10 years ago, they'd have the most cleanest data, but they don't change their processes. They don't change anything, but the data can be cleaned in 365.
So here's a use case for AI. I mean, these companies, Model N and Zyme, they employed hundreds upon hundreds of people in low-cost jurisdictions looking at 2 spreadsheets side by side. It was like manual work to get it to the 90% threshold. But AI, one thing it is really, really good at is pattern matching.
Mm-hmm.
And if one thing is, if there's only one comma in a big address that's off, it's really good at making suggestions at a 90% threshold. That means I don't need people staring at spreadsheets.
Yeah. Do you think that you started the conversation saying that, we're about 8 months away from seeing some real, meat on the plate? Listening to you two now, I think that's just, the urgency is much faster than that. Is it not doable, or is the vision just not there? 8 months seems too late.
Yeah, I said we're on an 8-year journey.
Yeah, sorry, no.
Yeah. So,
sorry,
but don't get confused. It's not something that if I'm going to say 10 or 20% of my competitors, I'm not waiting years to go in and start investing here. For me to be 10 or 20% of my competitors this quarter is going to look different in second quarter, in third quarter. I'm going to have to stay ahead of the race, and I'm going to have to, keep my lead. So I'm going to be looking to Scott. I'm going to be looking to 260 other entrepreneurs, and I'm going to be pushing them pretty hard with what I've already invested in and what I could invest in to go get quick wins. They're all going to be at the crawl level in 2026. Maybe some walk wins next year, and then some running wins in a couple of years from now. But the fact of the matter is, that's exactly what I'm doing as a channel professional. Is I understand almost better than any other era, whether mainframes or client server or cloud. I think I understand more about AI now, that the finish line seems almost clearer in terms of where it's going to get to, these holy grails, the research and its moments, and everything's in front of me now, that it makes more sense maybe than it has in the past. And I understand that I don't have the big investment to do the big transformation to kind of solve the world's problems. But nobody wants to be unemployed in this environment, and everybody wants to win. So I'm going to be pushing everyone pretty hard on how I can go and do these crawl projects.
Good, that will help. Here's a hard one. I don't know, we're getting on the top of the hour, but here's a hard one. Given the speed of how things are going, and given the amount of entrepreneurial investment that's going into this, or VC or PE, into real platforms that can execute on that vision and model that you're talking about, which a lot of people are adopting on paper, but don't seem to know how to get. Are we going to see a massive increase in hostile takeovers?
We're going to see an increase in M&A. I mean, I look at when industries go through platform moments. We recognize when the hyperscalers went through that moment, 10 years ago, and why you had the 3 separate from IBM, and they separated from Oracle and others, at that time. We recognized when SaaS companies, Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday and HubSpot and others, took on that platform moments and just started separating. When Salesforce started winning 73% of all CRM deals, they kind of separated, and we knew exactly kind of how they did that. Cybersecurity last year went through its platform moment, and you had 3 $30 billion acquisitions. CyberArk going into Palo Alto, you had Wiz going into Google, and then you had Splunk a couple of years ago going into Cisco. But that's going to accelerate because with 6,500 cybersecurity vendors, for example, the top 5 are formulating their platform moment, which means everyone on the adjacency, if you don't win in SMB or if you don't win in a certain product category, you don't have your niche, to be in the next 5.
Yeah.
Kind of the next group is going to go back into making these larger companies more powerful. Same thing's going to happen in distribution. Everyone that just lost their Microsoft, shingle on the door is going to have to do something if that was a major part of their business, and it moves business into more powerful. Yeah, so you could see a world, and we're not talking about TD SYNNEX buying Ingram here, but are we moving towards a world that we could have 4 or 5 $100 billion distributors? Yes. And that's a level of scale and economies of scale that they can invest back in their marketplace technology to orchestrate more of this data and to allow these agentic things to work. AI era, the 20 years, relies heavily on big, powerful, trillion-dollar valued companies making incredible investments, whether it's in NVIDIA chips or in language models. For everyone else that's looking to make money, we're adjacent to those big players. And we have to understand the integrations, the services, partnerships, the alliances. We have to understand the go-to-market motions before and after the first transaction. But we have to figure out how to become billionaires while others, 5 of them, I think, are going to become trillionaires in this next year.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And in order to do that, you're talking distributors now, right?
I'm talking industry-wide. Vendors, distributors, partners.
Okay. So in order for them to become like that, they have to meet the market. They have to go where the market is. To quote you, go where the puck is going, not where the puck is, right? Yeah. Did I quote you right there?
That's Wayne Gretzky. That's a good Canadian quote.
That's it. Good. So
Greeks weren't big into ice hockey, Jay. That's why I was questioning.
Anyway, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't misrepresenting you. I agree with that, but I think that where the puck is going is in not the traditional areas. It's going into platforms and automation and how AI is going to assist and accelerate and make all that useful. All right, there's a bunch of those companies behind you. All right, will they get acquired or will they acquire? Because in many instances, and the only reason why I say that, and Scott, please tell me to shut up if I'm saying too much there, but we're getting a lot of vendors coming to us and saying, why don't you just do it for us? Why don't you just become the distributor? Do I want to be the merchant of record all around the world? Do I want to do that again? Does Scott want to do that again?
And that's a hard no, Nick.
It's a hard no. It's a hard no because it shouldn't even be the conversation.
I know.
When they're coming to us instead of going to their distributors and saying they're not doing what I need, and the distributor says they'll put it up on a PowerPoint and say, well, we're talking to them, and they just take out collateral. So we're doing that, and we know they're not. And 2 years later, they come back and go, you're still not. Is the M&A market going to be flipped on its head?
Yeah, and it flips even further because we're in a model where software ate the world 14 years ago. That famous Mark Andreessen. Well, AI is actively eating software.
Yeah.
While AI is software, it's the pricing model and economics. It's the fact that we're not going to log into 250,000 SaaS applications and try to remember our password.
Yep.
It's the fact that these platforms are going to be where humans log in, and the rest of them, whether they're a set of workflows or a CRUD database, either one of those trying to be defensible, they lose the head off their software. So they can't sell a subscription anymore. All they can sell is consumption as people come in through the side door, including iasset and others.
Yeah.
Now, in the SaaS market, about 75% of companies fall into this category of more being a feature or a workflow than being a product.
Okay.
In this world of side doors, this falls down. The same thing in the channel tech stack.
Right.
Much of this, like I could think of 150 of these companies that I could, with AI, vibe code over a weekend, the features they built, and build that into another product without being a programmer. Just in plain English, help, having ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini just build that functionality into a bigger platform. So in that case, you don't even have to acquire it.
Yeah.
So that changes the game as well. But yes, platforms get bigger, they get more powerful. The one thing I didn't mention is platforms are synonymous with partnerships. There's no element of a platform, the 5 areas of a platform that I've walked into, that isn't about partnering. So the way to be successful in the AI era, Microsoft knows this, Google knows this, OpenAI knows this. Now Anthropic is hiring a global channel chief.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. NVIDIA knows this. It's all partnerships.
Yeah.
You got to be in the 7 layers of the deal. And you got to have some of those 7 partners saying nice things about you. There's no other way to success. 53% of Fortune 500 companies fail every 20 years. The ones that fail through the AI in all industries, the ones that fail through this era, that platform slide in their particular industry is going to be why.
Yeah.
They either did partnerships right or they didn't.
And the ones that survive don't even look like they did 20 years ago.
So this is our moment. This is our moment to kind of stand up as partner professionals and think about the broadening customer journey and know we need to deliver and we got to be out ahead of helping every company stay ahead of their competitors.
Yep. Does AWS have a channel chief?
Absolutely. Or no.
Perfect. That tells me that there could be potential acquisitions coming that way as well, saying, well, we need to acquire a channel. We got the back end right.
Depending on geopolitical, depending on economic, read the tweets every day. There's going to be opportunities for financial folks to make money.
Okay, so we're going to end on one question. And again, I thank you guys. We've gone into many different areas just to essentialize all the stuff that both of you have been talking about, which is eye-opening for me anyway. How does a channel leader prepare for what's coming in the vendor?
Well, for me, there's the areas you focus on. I got to focus on my team and the people and making them into superhuman and digging in as far as I can with AI to make each of them superhuman in what they do. I got to figure out the processes, the workflows, the business logic. I got to figure out connecting the dots, as Scott said, to again, staying in front. I got to really think about the economics. In the end, people might work for free for a short while, but if they're not being supported, if they're not being recognized, I have to understand this broadening cycle and where partnerships play and be able to make the right calculus of my limited dollars that I have. What used to be margin, I need to make sure that I'm allocating those dollars the most effectively, or at least a little bit better than my competitors are. And the final thing is I have to figure out, this is no longer anything to do with spreadsheets. This is all about the agentic models, the technology backbone that I'm going to have to build. And it's now not optional. It was in client server. It was even optional in cloud a little bit. You could kind of run, with humans and spreadsheets, but you're just not going to win. You're not going to win unless you build your own 7-layer stack that is collecting more clean data than your competitors. And agentically, you're using this data in everything you do. You're not going to win. Technology is absolutely now, a top consideration for channel professionals.
You should write a book about that, my friend, because that is just 100% spot on, and people need to learn that that is where it's going and that's where it needs to be, because you covered everything. And half of those things that you mentioned aren't even being covered because the companies that they work for hire him to do that and then get him to do other things, which is just insane. Scott, what would be your advice?
So it's always been about value. Everything that we do is to underpin value for our customers or ourselves. And that's what you should always focus on. And to Jay's point, if you're running at 3 basis points of margin in high income countries like Europe and Australia, you need to be able to add more value to the chain and In my distribution days, we were always more expensive than our competitors because we loaded a lot more value into the deal. And if our price is only an issue if all things are equal. So it's value, value, value. From our iasset point of view, the value's in your data. I mean, there's still value in people and there's still value in process and all the other bits and pieces that go together to make a company. But our focus is getting your data absolutely spot on so you can build from that.
You should write a book about that too, because how do you make your data useful and clean?
Yeah.
I always, and I'll end with this, I always tell people, you don't have bad data. You sold something. It couldn't have been that bad. All right. What you have is it was collected for a different reason. So repurpose it in a model that's actually going to give you those channel expansion, channel value expansion opportunities, and making sure that you recognize that a renewal is contested. So it always is. It's an opportunity for a correction or an opportunity for an advancement.
Well, as I say, Nick, every sale is churn.
Every sale is churn, absolutely. People don't present churn enough. They don't even want to take it to Wall Street because Wall Street will crucify them if they see how much churn they're getting. Guys, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much again, Jay. You've been very generous. You guys have blown my... I've got more questions than answers now, so I might have to do a part 2 of this eventually. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you so much.